Our speaker today is William Floyd, who is a partner with Nexen Pruitt in Columbia, South Carolina. William and I have worked together for many, many years, way back to the total 80s. And so we've known each other for a long time. And he is a certified expert and certified specialist in labor and employment law, like all of our speakers have been so far. So he knows the subject matter and speaks regularly, and we're lucky to have him here with us today. I'm going to pass around the sign-in sheet. You see your name, just initial, as always, and if you're not on here, just add your name at the bottom and initial. If you're highlighted on here, that means you're special. And because towards the end of this training program, we're going to have at least one and maybe as many as 3 different role-playing scenarios. And so if you're highlighted, you've been selected to be part of the presentation later today. So be sure to pay close attention. If you're not highlighted, still pay attention, because some of the people who are highlighted might not be here. They may have come yesterday, and we may need some last-minute fill-ins. So you never know who's going to get asked. But you know.
Yeah, I know.
With that, I'll turn it over to William.
Thank you, Grant. Well, good morning to each of you guys.
Good morning.
It's great to be here. I was here yesterday. We had 2 very good training sessions, and everything worked together great. You know, the video, the PowerPoint. Well, we are really upping the ante today because now it's going to be videotaped. And I'm not quite sure what we're going to do with the video, but I'm assured by Grant that blackmail will be involved because he and I go way back, and he already has a news story on me as recently as this morning. So we will not go into that though, Grant. It's great to be here. You guys are fortunate to be at AFL. It's a great company, and it's a privilege to be with you all this morning. We're talking about a challenging topic, a difficult topic, sometimes a very emotional topic of workplace violence. And it's one, though, that we need to tackle because it's happening every day. Not every day at AFL, but every day in our community, it is happening. So the story I shared yesterday was out of my community. So I currently live in Lexington, South Carolina. I used to live in Taylor's for about 15 years when I worked in Greenville. Now I'm in Lexington and all over the place. But in Lexington, South Carolina, on Thursday, a week ago tomorrow, the school bus driver at Midway Elementary School, where my daughter used to go to school, was driving into the school and noticed something peculiar, causing her to call 911. The school bus driver did, and this was in the morning drive for the school bus. What she noticed was a person with a firearm at the perimeter of the property. A very scary thing if you're in a school, or a very scary thing if you're any place where firearms shouldn't be. She noticed a man, middle-aged man, walking around with a firearm at the perimeter of Midway Elementary School. She called 911. A couple of things happened very quickly. One was the school went on lockdown. Right? Scary thing for all the elementary school kids. And also, the sheriff's deputies in Lexington County descended upon Midway Elementary School and searched for this mysterious man. Well, after 3 hours of lockdown of Midway Elementary School, the sheriffs found their person, and it turns out it was the owner of the adjoining property, which is a wooded area, much like right over here, and the owner was hunting squirrels, okay, on his property. Perfectly legal. He was okay, you know, he's within his rights. Lockdown ended, and crisis averted. But the point of that story is that we are all hypersensitive to workplace violence. Had it not been the owner, had it not been a shotgun to go hunting squirrels, had it been something much more ugly than that, it would be a much uglier story, perhaps. And it happens every day. It happened, so then I cited that on this past Monday, the high school, the local high school in our community went on lockdown drill. Not because of what went on the week before, but it's just part of what they're doing. So it's happening every day and involves probably our children, for those of us who have children, more so than us, perhaps, because they're living and thinking it. But it happens in our community and happens at AFL, it happens at neighboring companies it happens. When we surveyed the group yesterday about their experiences with workplace violence, we got a range of different things. And I'm not going to, we have a bigger group this morning, so I can't go through and ask each of you what your experiences were. But what we heard yesterday is that they ranged from what I would say the verbal threats, okay, the uncomfortable conversations, all the way up to fights in the workplace, maybe not at AFL, but at their prior workplaces. And then some of them talked about shooting incidents, okay? So it spans, workplace violence spans a scope or a range of experiences, and often they're very negative, but it's an important topic for us to talk about today. Our starting place is, what is workplace violence? You know, there are lots of definitions. It really is, in the eye of the beholder, something that is violent to you may not be violent to somebody else. But our framework for our conversation is not what our own individual opinions are about workplace violence, but rather what OSHA defines workplace violence. So OSHA, now I talked with Doug earlier, it sounds like we got your OSHA, your safety team here today, so I'm humbled to be before you guys. But they are very familiar with OSHA. OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. It's a federal government agency based out of Washington, but they have lots of branch offices. In South Carolina, for example, they work out of Columbia in unison with South Carolina OSHA. But they are empowered to help make the workplace safer, okay? That's their number one job. And so typically your interactions with OSHA would be about obvious workplace hazards, hopefully in advance of a problem happening. And Doug, I was teasing the group yesterday about, you know, trip hazards in front of me here as I was trying to, you know, patrol this area. And this would be an OSHA type of issue. If you have cords, you don't have them, you know, taped down, and I'm not supposed to be over that way anyway, so I'll just come this way. But that's a typical OSHA thing. Workplace violence is covered by OSHA. There's not a specific standard dealing with workplace violence. So an OSHA standard is one that says, thou shalt do X in the workplace. Lockout, tag out, for example. But with regard to workplace violence, there's not a specific standard that says, with regard to workplace violence, this is what you have to do. Instead, you have the more subjective, the general duty clause, okay? Well, when you type, if you went to www.osha.gov, and it would pop up a very robust website about workplace violence. And in there would be a definition on the OSHA website. So this is OSHA's definition, and it defines workplace violence as, and you see that broken down on the slide, the components of it. Any act or threat, all right? An act is pretty obvious. It's doing something to somebody or to something. So actually doing it. In the case of workplace violence, it would be somebody hitting another person. That would be an act. A threat would be a fear of action. And that would be somebody, for example, in a workplace situation, pulling back his fist or her fist, but not actually hitting the other person. So that would be an example of a threat of harm. But workplace violence is either an act or a threat. The act is more obvious, right? Because it's happened, it's real, it's tangible, it hurts. The threat is intangible. It's more of a perception issue. So often when we deal with workplace violence, we're dealing with perceptions. But it's any act or threat of physical violence. So that would be, I keep on coming back to my stereotype of an actual fight going on the workplace. That's the most obvious example of workplace violence, but it also can include harassment, intimidation. And before I go to the other two bullet points there, harassment and intimidation. Harassment we're talking about now is something typically different than the sex harassment training that you had previously. Right? With regard to sexual harassment, you could have a sexual harassment situation that involves workplace violence. It's unusual to have that because really the goal of the two behaviors are different, but you could have that. So my earlier chart yesterday, just to illustrate, if this is workplace violence, and this is sex harassment, you couldn't have some commonality there so that you could have sex harassment that involves workplace violence. But more often than not, they're separate, and they're treated separately. They certainly impact the workplace, but in a different kind of way. So when I talk about harassment here, it's not necessarily sex harassment or intimidation. Think the term bullying, okay? The schoolyard bully from your school years, that is a workplace violence type of scenario. And then we have, or other threatening, disruptive behavior. So it's a broad category of interactions with each other that are very negative, in which someone is actively or threatening to act with physical violence or harassing somebody else at work. Right? This is workplace violence. This is not domestic violence. Unfortunately, however, what goes on at home sometimes doesn't stay at home, and that causes workplace violence situations. So all too often we have domestic violence going on at home. The employee of that situation comes to work, and even though the domestic violence didn't happen here at work, it has ripple effects here at work. And a lot of times you'd read about or see on TV that the disgruntled spouse or the disgruntled boyfriend or girlfriend who's not an employee of a particular company is coming to the employer knowing that the person they want to see is at work. So that's where a home situation becomes a work situation. But typically when we're talking about workplace violence, we're talking about what I call the fence perimeter. This facility, that facility, the property, that's what at AFL right here is the work situation. All right? Any questions about what it is? Workplace violence ranges, and you see that I have a thermometer, and yesterday was too cold. Today's not much better, but hopefully we'll eventually get to spring. When it comes to workplace violence, it's similar. You have the cooler aspects of workplace violence to the extent that that's possible. One example of that would be verbal abuse. Certainly we don't condone verbal abuse. You don't want to be verbally abused. But by contrast, verbal abuse is kind of cooler compared to the top side of my thermometer here on the slide of homicide. Okay? Actually killing somebody is much more severe than the verbal abuse. There's a range in between. Workplace violence includes all of those things: threats, verbal abuse, physical assaults, or, God forbid, homicide itself. Workplace violence can involve the gamut of people that you interact with. All right, let's go through that. The first and most obvious category are you, employees. And when I say employees now, I'm saying very generically employees. But it can be hourly employees, salaried employees, technical employees, or in between. That's a category that can involve workplace violence. You have a policy at AFL, workplace violence policy, that we'll go over in a few minutes. It covers each of these categories, specifically including employees. This is the category that you would more often see than not. This would be the category of people involved with a fight in the workplace, for example. The next couple of categories are the surprising ones, I think. But we see a lot of workplace violence involving clients and customers. We have anybody involved in sales here today or marketing? Yeah, all right. So we're not necessarily saying that your customers are going to beat up on you if they don't get the deal they want. That's not quite what we're saying. Although I guess we could have that. Yeah, it does. You get that verbal abuse, right? Now, the kind of workplace violence we're talking about now really goes beyond AFL. It's more of a situation in where when you have a direct customer interaction, you can have the potential for workplace violence. Here, I'm a long-term resident of Greenville, born in Spartanburg. So I'm going to pick on Spartanburg Regional Medical Hospital, and I'm going to speak of Greenville Memorial Hospital, where all of our children were born. When you go into either one of those facilities, if you've ever been in the ER facility at either one of those, After you see the triage person, normally at the desk, who else do you see there aside from patients that are coming in? Security guard. And unfortunately, it has to be now almost in every one of those ER facilities. The reason why is workplace violence. So a hospital's approach is different than AFL. It's both a serious issue, but they're concerned about their employees, but they're more concerned about their clients' customers, their patients. Because when someone's a patient coming into an ER, they're sometimes at their worst, okay? Something they took, some situation they went through, maybe they're in pain, and they want to get attention fast, and that may not be the healthiest thing for everybody else. So that's why security's there. Nurses and healthcare providers are on the front line when it comes to workplace violence. They get beat up. What's another category of a workplace where clients, customers beat up the employees?
Convenience stores?
Convenience stores, yeah. So that would be a client, customer coming in who's a robber, all right? That's an excellent example, sad example. Others?
Restaurant or waitress?
Yeah, and verbal abuse about that. Anybody here ever worked for the government? You know, state or local? And I'm just going to raise your hand. No, it's a great thing. You know, my father-in-law is a civil servant. You know, he's retired now. He worked in the Social Security Administration for his entire career. And he can tell you that there is a great potential for workplace violence when you're dealing with the social service delivery. People get upset. So, workplace violence for the government is different than AFL. It's a different scenario. Yes, sir?
There was a news reporter in a union that got beat up on site while she was reporting the news on site, you know, at the scene, and she got attacked by people living in that area.
I hadn't heard about that, but that would be an example.
About a year ago, I think.
That would be an example of maybe not even client customers, just bystanders. You know, so that would be relevant. If you worked in a prison, if you're a prison guard, clients, customers, that's the ones you're concerned about. And there's a lot of workplace violence there. So it really depends upon where you are working, which of these categories you are most concerned with. Here at AFL, we're concerned with all of them, but your primary two categories I would suggest would be employees, and what's the other one that I would be very concerned with? That last bullet point about visitors, okay? And the visitors, I'm an authorized visitor. Grant allowed me in here. I went through your gauntlet of the receptionist. She was very kind. She took a very ugly photograph of me as I came through that Grant tells me he's going to keep. It looks more like a post office photograph. But she kept me in a secure area until I was cleared to come in here. So you have processes that control and help with this workplace violence issue. No doubt, before I even walked into your waiting room, there were cameras there videotaping that, okay? In addition to being videotaped right now. But visitors, you guys are doing a great job with controlling visitor access. We are still concerned, though, with visitors because the disgruntled spouse who's an unauthorized visitor coming on site to meet with his or her spouse who works here would be an example of workplace violence playing out in a bad way. Questions about these categories? We mentioned about OSHA. So you see on this slide, we have the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and it administers the Occupational Safety and Health Act. And what OSHA tells us is that they accumulate all the calls, all the investigations on an annual basis, and they've come up with, you know, the top, in this case, top 4 list. And workplace violence 25 years ago would not have been on this list, all right? But now it is either 4th or 3rd. It's really moving up to 3rd right now of being a leading cause of fatal occupational injuries in the workplace. That's pretty staggering when you think about it. What do you think the source of the first leading cause of fatal injuries? Driving is the first. Transportation is the first leading cause. So if you were a salesperson and going out, on a sales call and you have a traffic accident, that would be an example of an occupational injury. Now, I guess my crowd's loaded here with my safety folks. What's the second one then? Falls. You guys are on it. Man, that's good. It's falls. Yeah. If you ever been on a roof. My grandfather was a roofer. I never could understand how he got up there and could safely do that job. But falls, like from scaffolding, et cetera, is the second leading one. Now, workplace violence is kind of sometimes considered third, sometimes considered fourth. The other option, the other cause, is occupational exposure to like electrocution or chemicals. So that's the other reason. So the point of this slide is that workplace violence, unfortunately, is a growing problem. And it's one that 20, 30 years ago, we wouldn't have had a slide about it. Now we do, and the numbers are going up. This one is concerning to me as well. Workplace violence is the leading cause of death for women in the workplace. Now, for the females in the room, this is concerning. For anyone working, it's concerning. And I think this is a combination of a number of factors. One is, just the integration of women into the workplace. Where are they fitting in? What are they doing? And their roles as moms or spouses or girlfriends. And this is where we have the unfortunate interaction of domestic violence and the workplace. So even though workplace violence is either the third or fourth leading cause, generically speaking, of fatal injuries for everybody, for our female employees, it's the first. We have a video that's from a newscast in Orlando where they had a workplace violence situation, and they have some good tips as part of this.
This morning, all but one of the survivors from Friday's downtown shooting rampage are out of the hospital.
Investigators say that Jason Rodriguez shot 6 people, killing one of them. He admits he opened fire on the 8th floor of the Gateway Center, the home of the transportation engineering firm RS&H. Rodriguez once worked for the company, but back in 2007, managers asked him to resign. His former co-workers are still in shock.
This is something that happened over 2.5 years ago, and he actually had employment elsewhere after this. So we did everything we could.
Call Crime Line at 1-800-823-TIPS if you have information about where Rodriguez went after the shootings and before he surrendered.
So the big question is, were there any warning signs? Janie Lacey, a registered mental health counselor with Total Life Counseling, live in our newsroom this morning. Janie, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Mike.
Let's get to the 4 warning signs that are often overlooked. The first one, you say overreaction to criticism and resistance to changes in procedures. What do you mean by that?
Well, what tends to happen is we have to first say that there is no set profile and we can't predict human behavior. However, that when a person is helpless and when they're hopeless, there are signs of desperation. So when it comes to overreaction, did they get a performance evaluation where they did not accept that criticism very well? And are they strongly resistant towards company policies that just seems a little bit over the top? Okay,
you also say anger that's directed at coworkers and or the company.
Right. When you look at some of these profiles that have recently occurred, the person had a strong anger and intensity towards a group of people that they work with, towards management, towards changes in the policy that they didn't necessarily like, and you would hear them expressing that in the office.
The third one, obsession with coworkers or company policies.
They just can't get certain things. They can't get over certain things. If there's been a change in the policy, you hear them talking about it repeatedly, how they can't believe this has happened. And they will also self-sabotage in certain cases where they necessarily do not want to follow the policy and try to get other people to follow them.
And the last one, you say bullying others, threats to supervisors. That seems kind of obvious.
Absolutely. Is there intimidation? Is there harassment? And that's why it's so important that companies have certain workplace violence policies in place, so that when other employees are experiencing harassment, intimidation, comments that just make them feel uncomfortable, that they have a safe place that they can go to and talk to someone about it and report it.
So Janie, if anybody notices any of these signs, what should they do?
They should talk to their supervisor. The supervisor would be the first line of defense.
All right, Janie Lacey, a mental health counselor with Total Life Counseling. Janie, thank you so much for joining us with your
Mike.
thoughts and tips.
Well, that was a real situation, played out in Orlando a couple of years ago. And did you notice what the alleged perpetrator looked like? Okay. What did you see? What are some demographics of what you saw? White male. What age? Middle age. It's all a matter of perspective, you know. 40's the new 20, right? And I keep saying now that 51's the new 25, but it doesn't quite work that way. Okay. Well, when it comes to workplace violence, the stereotypes we have in our head are quite different than the reality of what people are experiencing in terms of workplace violence. I don't want to give away the remainder of that because we have a question about it in a moment, but it just, when you think about workplace violence, when I think about workplace violence, I need to look in a mirror, because that's the stereotype of who we're talking about. All right, so she mentioned in the video some common situations. And she also stressed, though, we can't predict human behavior. That's one thing, having done now labor and employment law for a long, long time, over 25 years. When you have people, you're going to have problems. And when you have people problems, they're going to be different every time, right? There's never a dull moment in the things that Grant and I get to do when it comes to labor and employment, because everybody is different. Well, similarly, when we're trying to predict workplace violence traits, everybody's different. It may be one situation that has no impact or trigger on somebody else, but in this particular person's situation did. Well, nonetheless, we can still generalize, and using those generalizations, one is some common problems, root cause problems, would be overaction to workplace criticisms or policies. So this is not just somebody who doesn't like a new policy or a new direction. This is somebody who really, really doesn't like it, right? And if you detect somebody who really, really doesn't like it, that could be, I'm not saying that person's, destined for workplace violence, but that's an indicator. One example I used yesterday was a real life example that occurred in the Midlands of South Carolina. And this was a few years ago, but it's still relevant. And it was during the big debate about whether the State House would display the Confederate flag from the top of the State House or someplace else. Okay, it remains a controversial thing, because as recently as yesterday, I heard that the USC women's basketball team couldn't host, the NCAA initial play-in game or initial game because of a boycott of the state because of the flag. So it remains a controversial thing, but this is several years ago when it was really getting heated. Well, during that time, an employer in the Midlands said, we don't want to have that dispute in our workplace, and so it implemented a policy that said, in effect, no, if you're an employee, you cannot display a Confederate flag on workplace premises or other things like that. Okay, it wasn't just a Confederate flag policy, but it was that and then some. Well, most of the employees understood that and understood the disruption. There was one particular guy that I got to spend about 3 years with in some related litigation who really, really didn't like that. And so he took the rebel flag off of his pickup truck, when he came into the parking lot, but he then quickly put big old decals on his toolbox when he was wheeling the toolboxes through the workplace. That was a situation that became very tense for a lot of people. That's an example of a workplace violence common problem. So it was an overreaction to a workplace policy. Next would be anger directed at company or employees. So some people don't take change well inside and outside. This is extreme reactions to that. So this would be anger directed at the company or employees. The example I used yesterday, do we have any of our HR team in here right now? Okay, yeah. So this is an HR example, happened here in Greenville. We had an HR person who was meeting with an employee. Unfortunately, it was about attendance violations there'd been too many of them, and we were having to let that person go. That person didn't appreciate being told that her employment was being terminated. She was getting angry, but not erupting yet. The HR person politely opened the door for her to allow her to leave, and the now former employee proceeded to slam the door on the HR manager's arm and broke her arm. That's a workplace violence situation that happens, and this would be an example of it. Next, obsession with coworkers or policies is similar to what we just talked about. This also, though, could be what I call the so-called fatal attraction. Now, Grant's already dated me in the sense that I'm a product of the 80s and then some, and one of the movies in the 80s that sticks out here in my mind is Fatal Attraction. Man, that was a tough movie. Who was in that movie? Do you remember the actors? Glenn Close and Michael Douglas. Glenn Close had a fatal attraction on Michael Douglas and then some. That still causes you get your attention every time you watch that movie, but that's the kind of obsession that we're talking about, that fatal attraction type of obsession. And then that final point that the video made, as well as the slide makes, is bullying others. That the schoolyard bully doesn't go away, they just get employed some other place, and if they have the opportunity to repeat that misconduct, it can create a problem in the workplace. Any questions about these categories? In addition to characteristics, we also categorize workplace violence, and these are the 4 types of categories, the 4 categories of workplace violence, and you all, through your comments already, have already identified some of these. There's 4 types. The first type would be, somebody mentioned, at a convenience store situation. First type of workplace violence would fall into this type 1 category, where you have violence by an outsider that's there to do harm to get money or possessions. So the typical bank robber situation, that's a type 1 workplace violence situation. Type 2 is violence directed at employees by customers, clients, etc., for whom an organization provides services. That would be the hospital situation I just described, the ER situation where you have to have security because of disgruntled patients or patients' families. Type 3 is really the primary concern of AFL, due to AFL situation, violence against co-workers or supervisors by present or former employees. That's the more stereotypical scenario that we would have here, and that's type 3 workplace violence. And then type 4 would be violence by a non-employee who has a personal relationship with an employee. That's the domestic violence outside of work spilling over into work. So types 3 and 4 would be most relevant to you all. Types 1 and 2 relevant to other employers. Any questions about those categories? Well, since you guys aren't asking questions, I'm going to ask questions of you now. How about that? This is the interactive portion of our session. And there are valuable prizes for successful candidates. And even if you answer wrong, you still get this valuable prize. And I'm using valuable in quotes, okay? When you see it, you're going to understand why I'm saying that. But I need somebody to volunteer to answer this multiple choice question for me. And the question is, of the 4 types of workplace violence, the largest category by far is, and Grant's getting the valuable prizes right now, this will put you over when I show you what you could win. A coffee mug, okay. Who wants to win a coffee mug? Yes, sir, in the corner.
Yes, 3. Type 3.
Type 3 is your answer. Why would you say type 3? Let's look back at type 3. Violence against coworkers, supervisors by present or former employees. That certainly here at AFL would be the primary concern, okay? Yes, sir.
Type 1.
All right, let's look at that. Type 1 would be the bank robber kind of situation. Well, for those of you know, I think I have 2 mugs. So I got 2 mugs going back there. The correct answer is type 1, okay?
So I get both mugs?
You get both, but you've got to share one. The reason is, I think it's more typical, unfortunately, to have robbers of convenience stores, banks. If you're a taxi driver, you are in a high-risk profession when it comes to workplace violence. If you are a Domino's pizza deliverer, you're in a high-risk profession because you're out there interacting. And you're falling into 80%. 80% of the workplace violence situations are estimated to cover type 1. And so types 2, 3, and 4 are in the remaining 20%. And just like in life, if you're that 1%, even though it's just 1%, it's significant to you because it's personally impacting you. So I don't want to diminish the 20%, but those folks, maybe your family, friends who are in the convenience store, the retail store situation, where there's this risk of robbery, they are very much on the front lines about that. And before I forget it, Grant, I'm going to pass these 2 mugs. If you can help me give those 2 mugs back there in the corner. Yeah. Now that you've seen the value of prizes, I know the next contestants, Grant was supposed to put cash in each of these cups, but I forgot to ask him again. Statistically speaking, which demographic category is the most likely to engage in workplace violence? This is the easy question because we've already kind of talked about it. But having said that, who's going to be my contestant? Oh, there we go, front row. Teacher's pet, right here. Yeah, teacher's pet. So,
You got that one picked out.
yeah. Well, I liked actually the tough teenagers, both male and female, and the story I told about that was a real life situation in Los Angeles. I was there, my first trip to Los Angeles as a lawyer. True scenario, but it's one where this didn't quite fit. So I'm there, I'm big factory, and I noticed that there were like 500 workers. There was a lot of people in there doing some sorting, etc. And about half of them were wearing red bandanas, and the other half were wearing, blue bandanas and other kind of colors. But there were very much, the workplace was segregated by bandanas. And I was talking to the process person afterwards, saying, "Well, this is really ingenious. Are the red bandanas doing something different than the blue?" And system-wide, I was thinking systems, and they looked at me like I was crazy. They said, "This is Los Angeles, and those are the Bloods and the Crips, and they work here, but they don't get along. So we always just keep this dividing line between them." So, if I were in Los Angeles, I would have been answering A. B, middle-aged females recently separated. C, attorneys after bad training day. Fortunately for you guys, this is a good training day, so we're good there. The correct answer is looking in the mirror, middle-aged males from 30 to 48. I have now aged out of this category, but nonetheless, that's the stereotype of, or the characteristic of when it comes to workplace violence, when they do the demographics, they look more like me than anything else. It's a middle-aged person, normally Caucasian, and in that age group. Why would you think that? Now this came to me as a surprise, but in the last group people were able to rationalize this. Why do you think this is the correct answer?
More people working in that age group?
More people working in that age group, but not all, what else about that?
That's the age group of middle management that's usually released.
Okay, why not females? Why not, it's middle-aged males? It's I think a reflection also of more people working there as well. So you don't have the same blip of female, the large category of female middle-aged in 30-48. But the characteristic here is middle-aged Caucasian male, got a lot of stresses, whatever, and sometimes they go, and this is really going to date me, postal. Have you ever, we were talking about this over lunch yesterday. Do you all remember the phrase going postal? Yeah? You still sometimes say that? That phrase was first coined about, 20 years ago when there was a workplace violence situation at the post office. Well, that was unusual, and that's how we got going postal. That was an unusual situation. But unfortunately, we have so many workplace violence situations now, it's not just the post office. Next one, types of people who are most likely to commit workplace violence. A, recently fired employees. B, a person involved in separation, divorce, or child custody dispute. C, people with a history of past violence. Or D, all of the above. But who's going to be my contestant? Yes, sir. D. D is the correct answer. Give that man a coffee mug. Thank you. The reason why it's D is because all three of these other ones are characteristic. Good catch. Oh, we have a Clemson Tiger?
Ohio State Buckeye.
Oh, okay. Just rubbing it in. That's right. Recently fired employees. Not all recently fired employees are going to go, workplace violence, but some of them do. Person going through, domestic situations that are very tense. A person with a history of past violence. That is a characteristic. Or D, all the above. That's why all the above works. Last question, I think. Types of people who are most likely to commit workplace violence, part 2. Girl Scouts on Cookie Day. Now, for those of us who have daughters who became Girl Scouts, this is a tense day when those cookies come out, I'll assure you. B, people who have exhibited major behavioral changes. C, people who appear on the Jerry Springer Show. That is one weird show. Or D, Clemson Tigers. This is a little payback here, yeah. Okay. So who's going to be my contestant for this last question? Last chance at a mug. The mugs are really good. Okay, tonight. Yes, sir.
B.
B. That is, although I like D as being the question just because Grant's here, B is the correct answer right there. And that's the final mug for this session. Thank you, Grant, if you can get that. When we look at those other categories, some of them, most of them kind of silly, but when B, people who've exhibited major behavioral changes, I'm not talking about just a bad day, I'm talking about a 180 type of change in somebody. That's a characteristic for that. Yes, sir.
Question about, I thought we would have seen some more information that people that tend to use drugs would be on that list of workplace violence.
Yeah. It is one of the characteristics, but it's not, it's equal with these others or not even up that far. It is a characteristic. Why that is, I'm not sure. Maybe the prevalence of drug use versus violence, but it is a factor. The other challenge here, we're talking about behavior. Sometimes the behavior is drug induced. Sometimes it's a bad day at home induced, major behavioral change. Sometimes it's mental illness, right? So it's a balance, and mental illness is a disability, and it's protected by federal law. So you as an employer are balancing things. You're balancing your obligation not to discriminate against somebody with mental illness versus your concern about people who've exhibited major behavioral changes, And so it's a delicate balance that would involve your safety team, HR, and legal sometimes as you go through that formula. Other questions or comments about this? Well, and that's a good lead into this next slide about OSHA and about the law. So we talked about, with OSHA, it being the primary governmental agency dealing with this, they apply the General Duty Clause. And the General Duty Clause is kind of a catch-all for OSHA. If they don't have a specific standard, like I was teasing about the trip hazard, they don't have that. Their backup is the General Duty Clause. And the General Duty Clause is the employer's obligation is to provide a safe workplace. Okay? That's the obligation. If that doesn't happen, then you'll get a citation under the General Duty Clause. If there's a workplace violence situation here, let's say that one that led to a homicide, God forbid, but if there were a homicide here, your team would be calling OSHA within 24 hours, if not sooner, to let them know about a fatality in the workplace. We would have an investigation conducted by OSHA. One of the first things that OSHA would do, and I'm not just saying here at AFL, but generally speaking with any employer, one of the first things they do is ask for your policies. You guys are here at AFL are fortunate you have a good policy, so that would be provided. Then they want to start talking with the witnesses and the people involved, and they would start interviewing co-workers, and they would interview victim's family. They would interview, if allowed, the perpetrator. Where they're going with that is what happened when and who knew what when. Okay? Because what they're going to be doing is judging the employer, you all, based upon what I like to call the Monday morning quarterback standard. You know, how those who like football, if you watch it on Sunday, what you spend on Monday is everybody reliving what should have gone on Monday, right? The Monday morning quarterback. Well, the same thing, that's what, in effect, the legal equivalent of what OSHA's inspections do. They are going back and deciding what you knew when and what you should have done but didn't, or what you did and could have done better, right? That's the scrutiny that we're getting. That's it after the fact. Their overall concern is prevention. So they're wanting to know that before all this happens, that you have a policy, that you've gone through training, that they have right processes such as restricted access like you all have here. The consequence of not doing all those things are OSHA fines and, in worst case scenario, criminal penalties, people going to jail. All right? So it's unusual that you have a workplace violence situation that involves the employer going to jail, but it does happen occasionally that OSHA citations can lead to criminal prosecution. And the example I used yesterday happened just in North Carolina, not workplace violence, but in another situation where the owner went to jail. And what happened was, at that facility, which was a manufacturing facility, they had had a lot of slippage in that facility. People were stealing things, the employees were stealing things from the work floor and taking them out the back door. The employer said, well, we'll stop that. I'm going to put a chain around the exit door so they can't use that door anymore to get things out of the plant into their car. And that stopped that problem, but it hurt in a bad way when the fire started in that facility and the employees couldn't get out that back door because it was chain locked. Okay? That employer went to jail. That's the power of OSHA. Workplace violence, the law, continue with that. We have negligent hiring, negligent supervision, negligent retention. If you all were in a car wreck today, hopefully that will not happen, but if and when you're ever in a car wreck, the standard that is generally applied by our civil courts is the standard of negligence, okay? And whether or not you were operating the vehicle properly, with due care, and if you were or not. I mean, that's the standard. Well, this is not a car wreck, but it's a similar analysis, and that is whether the employer was negligent in hiring this person that committed workplace violence. Whether the employer was negligent in supervising. Maybe the manager, their supervisor, let things get by that shouldn't have gotten by, ignored things that shouldn't have gotten ignored, and failed to report serious situations. That would be a recipe for negligent supervision. Negligent retention would be knowing that there's a problem and allowing that person to stay there. So these are all concepts that would apply to a potential workplace violence situation. The outcome of these kind of allegations can be civil liability through the court system that can amount to a lot of money. I know in your prior training you talked about sexual harassment and jury verdicts there. You could have very significant jury verdicts in a bad situation involving workplace violence. Any questions about the legal concepts here? The next slide would be, there it is your policy itself. And you all are fortunate here at AFL to have a good policy, and the policy goes on, really, I think it's 2 pages, and I just lifted out of it several different aspects that I want to highlight right now. But the whole policy is available to you all. First of all, you'll see in this first line, it says AFL maintains a zero tolerance policy. What does zero tolerance policy mean in a workplace violence situation? What does zero tolerance mean?
No second chance.
No second chances. That's one way to describe it. Meaning, we don't want it and we're not going to have it. Zero tolerance. It's a standard that we typically apply to lockout tagout. Zero tolerance in getting around the lockout tagout. It's the most heightened scrutiny of conduct in a workplace. Zero tolerance. It's critical that employees report any acts or threats of violence. So the policy says, if it happens, it's important that you report it. And the you is employees, hourly employees. The you is management employees, supervisors, administrative staff. If it happens, you need to report it. To whom? Well, you're supposed to notify your supervisor, and it goes on from there, or HR or other manager immediately. So you want to let other management know about it. Similar to the anti-harassment policy that you all had trained about, we want, if it happens, you want to report it. If it happens to you, certainly you want to report it. If you observe it happening, you want to report it. All right? Employees should be able to recognize and be able to identify threatening behavior. So if it happens and you want to report it, what is the it? Well, remember the first slide we had was the definition of workplace violence. And workplace violence is an act or threat of physical harm, and remember that assault, intimidation, harassment. That's what we're reporting. What's going to happen once that report occurs will be dealt with in the next couple of slides that we'll have. Violation of this policy may result in discipline, and it goes on from there, discipline up to including discharge. And so if somebody is accused of workplace violence, it'd be investigated, and if in the end that didn't happen, then there wouldn't be discipline, or there would be some discipline that would be appropriate for that. On the other hand, if it happened and it was a pure violation of this policy, then it would fall under the zero tolerance part. This is the foundation. This policy is the foundation for a lot of what you all do with regard to workplace violence. So it's good that you all have it. As part of this, you all have developed, your team here has developed an incident flow chart. And it lays out in a very real way, that step by step. And this flow chart is a couple of pages. And I don't have all of the pages. Doug has the entire flow chart if you all are interested in the entire one. So I didn't put them all up as a slide. But it starts at the top of our flow chart, an incident. Something happens. The it of workplace violence. It happens. Supervisor contacts. So that was the other part of the policy. If it happens, report it. All right? And here's the chain of command as part of that. They're going to report it to the risk assessment team, HR, safety, and manager of the area. Okay? They come together. And Doug, if you want to comment further on these as we go through, we can do that. But then from there, the group is going to evaluate the situation. No risk, that's the end of the chart. Potential risk, and then it's going to continue evolving. It's going to involve EAP. Yesterday, Caroline Trawick was here from your EAP team. She sat right there. She participated in our training. Unfortunately, she could not be here today. She left a few slides behind that I'll cover in her absence. But she's a valuable member of this response team. And there's going to be interviewing going on and risk evaluation, high, medium, and low. So the rest of your flow chart flows from where it lands, where the risk exposed by whatever that was, the workplace violence, the it. Questions or comments about your flow chart? Okay. Next, bomb threats. This applies more for our customer meeting staff. The kind lady who let me in the building this morning, and others like her or him, who normally are interacting primarily with customers or visitors or answering the phone. If you get a bomb threat that way, he or she would be handling it this way. But now in the days of direct telephone lines, each of us are a potential recipient of a bomb threat that's being handed out at AFL. There's a high school in Columbia, South Carolina, that 3 days in a row, this is back in the fall, 3 days in a row they got bomb threats. One day after another, and each time they're having to evacuate the school, they're having to call in the dogs to look for the bombs, because it's not one where, even by day 3, you're thinking this is not real, but you can't take the risk there. So it happens. And as part of the bomb threat part, or other kind of threat like this, you want to ask some W questions. Who's calling? Would they identify who they are? What are they saying is going to happen? Where are they saying that this thing's been placed? and you want to follow the flow chart we talked about before. But as concerning as that is, you just need to take deep breaths if you get one of those kind of calls, and listen and ask questions if given the opportunity. Just stay calm. A similar slide, we call this stranger danger. So you see an acronym DANGER. We've broken it down. This would be, I'm not saying that this is not a situation where you would see somebody that has a gun at AFL and you're running toward that person with a gun. That's not what we're saying here. We're saying this is a situation where you see somebody who appears to be out of place and you're interacting with him or her. Now you all are fortunate. I'm looking around and most of you, I can see your badges clearly. So I know, you guys know who's at AFL because you have your badge, right? You know who the visitor is because they have, a sticker with an ugly photograph on it. But what happens if you can't see the badge, can't see the sticker, and you see somebody in an area that you don't in an area where they shouldn't be? Well, one thing you can do is you can approach that person if you feel it's safe, okay? And you can ask if you can be assistant. Maybe it's a visitor like me who's just in the wrong part of the building. Note anything out of the ordinary, so you're having an interaction. If it's concerning to you, you want to report it. Okay? If it goes beyond somebody just being lost, that it's a serious situation, you want to report that to the proper people after you've evaluated. So that's the stranger danger in the lowest tier, okay, of what you need to be doing. The next segment of what we want to talk about is, so that's on one level, the heightened level. Okay, this is the video that we're going to display. That's an uncomfortable video. It's a video, it's so-called active shooter video. Doug helped us identify this. It's good for training, but it's an uncomfortable situation. But unfortunately, it's something we need to grapple with because of the nature of workplace violence.
It may feel like just another day at the office, but occasionally, life feels more like an action movie than reality. The authorities are working hard to protect you and to protect our public spaces. But sometimes bad people do bad things. Their motivations are different. The warning signs may vary, but the devastating effects are the same. And unfortunately, you need to be prepared for the worst. If you were ever to find yourself in the middle of an active shooter event, your survival may depend on whether or not you have a plan. The plan doesn't have to be complicated. There are 3 things you could do that make a difference: run, hide, fight. First and foremost, if you can get out, do. Always try and escape or evacuate, even when others insist on staying. Encourage others to leave with you, but don't let them slow you down with indecision. Remember what's important, you, not your stuff. Leave your belongings behind and try to find a way to get out safely. Trying to get yourself out of harm's way needs to be your #1 priority. Once you are out of the line of fire, try to prevent others from walking into the danger zone and call 911. If you can't get out safely, you need to find a place to hide. Act quickly and quietly. Try to secure your hiding place the best you can. Turn out lights, and if possible, remember to lock doors. Silence your ringer and vibration mode on your cell phone. And if you can't find a safe room or closet, try to conceal yourself behind large objects that may protect you. Do your best to remain quiet and calm. As a last resort, if your life is at risk, whether you are alone or working together as a group, fight. Act with aggression. Improvise weapons. Disarm him. And commit to taking the shooter down, no matter what. Try to be aware of your environment. Always have an exit plan. Know that in an incident like this, victims are generally chosen randomly. The event is unpredictable and may evolve quickly. The first responders on the scene are not there to evacuate or tend to the injured. They are well trained and are there to stop the shooter. Your actions can make a difference for your safety and survival. Be aware and be prepared. And if you find yourself facing an active shooter, there are 3 key things you need to remember to survive. Run, hide, fight.
What do y'all think about the video, what they displayed? First of all, who did you see in the video as the perpetrator? White, male, middle-aged, a little on the younger side it looked like. All right, so he fit the stereotype. It's not clear if he was a former employee or a current employee or just somebody like, unfortunately, what happened up in Washington about, a year ago when we had a Navy contractor come involved. So not a Navy employee, but a Navy contract committing workplace violence. But here, the scenario fit that characteristic. And you saw, the protocol for dealing with such a terrible situation. And these are Caroline's slides. I give credit to her for these. These are some of the indicators. Younger than 40 is who we're talking about. The person, in addition to age and demographics, might lack social skills, may have been a victim of teasing in the past, does not take criticism well, blames others, threatens, and these are all ors, right? They're not ands, and these are all just dealing with human behavior. Somebody who typically might have emotional outbursts, depression, anger, anxiety, doesn't accept responsibility, and interest in guns and weapons. So those are kind of some profile items. And here's some what she calls vulnerabilities. Pre-incident behavior exists, but warning signs are disregarded. So this would be something where we saw something, but we ignored it. That would be there. And one thing in talking about this slide yesterday, one really good point. She said that was, it's a terrible situation what was depicted on the video. None of us want to go through anything like that. It's very basic response of run, hide, or fight back if you had to in worst case scenarios. But one thing she says that she has seen happen that doesn't help is pulling fire alarms. There's a fire alarm right behind your head right there. In case of this type of emergency, don't pull the fire alarm. Why is that?
Get people running into the line of fire.
Okay, so people running in the line of fire. So instead of running out, maybe they're running toward, the situation, and it adds chaos. Those are the two main points she made yesterday. And the chaos would be panic. It's already bad enough, but the kind of panic that we're talking about is just people freezing and terrible things happen. And then what you can do to overcome fear. These definitely are EAP things, but one of the points that she puts here in that last paragraph is take a deep breath, right? It's a terrible situation, but just take a deep breath. Maybe take 4 of them. And then as you're trying to remain calm in an otherwise terrible situation, then you're going to be a little bit better able to deal with that if you can just get control of yourself a little bit to run, hide, or fight back. Questions or comments with that? All right, now that you didn't have questions of me, with Grant's help, we may have some questions of you all in a different kind of way through these scenarios. And we've devised with help internally here up to 3 scenarios. We'll try at least 2 of them. I think we have enough time to try 2 of them right now.
Okay.
And why don't we go to scenario 3? Yeah? Scenario 3. And
Our volunteers for scenario number 3 come up and meet with William right out here. Carl Pritchett, Steve Murray, Roger Miller, and Andy Street.
all right, yep.
Okay.
Well, we have a great cast of characters who have been involuntarily volunteered. They're good sports. This is just a learning dissection type of opportunity. But what this scenario deals with is not unique to AFL. It happens all the time. And I've described this scenario the love triangle. All right, so with that, action.
Oh, we're gonna have so much fun this weekend. We got the beach, we're so
Hey, what's going on with
Just yeah.
This is my girlfriend.
What the hell's going on? Hey, what's going on?
Get this guy right here. He's
No, you won't. No, you're not. No, you're not. Calm down. Okay? I want you need to go home. You need to go. All right. You need to go. Okay, you two, get back to work. All right? Get back to work.
Well, that was scene 1. Scene 2 is supervisor. Supervisor learns that the person he sent home is sitting in his truck in the parking lot just brooding over this. And it's you want some of this, he's saying.
Sent the wrong guy home.
Yeah.
Sent the little guy home.
So what does supervisor, what are you going to do, having heard
I'm
that?
going to pick up the phone and call HR and say, look, we got a problem out there. There's somebody sitting out on the truck. I don't know what the potential is, but I've sent him away from the work. There's a situation out there where violence was going to erupt, so I was going to send him off site and ask him to go home, and he didn't leave.
Okay. All right, let's have a round of applause for our cast of characters. You know,
I was just joking, right?
yeah. Yeah, everybody says, yeah, I'll go home. All right, I called it the love triangle because sometimes those interpersonal relationships kind of explode or are exposed at work, right? Have you guys ever heard or seen or experienced something like this? Maybe not personally, but it happens, right? So all the time. So the scenario we had were 3 people, 3 co-workers finding out about each other one person apparently knew about the other two, but the other two didn't know about the other two. And it was not a friendly conversation, right? If we had played out, allowed to play out a little bit, the interaction between the two males of the triangle, it was going to get ugly pretty quick, wasn't it? It was a workplace violence situation. So this one was playing out with threats. We didn't have actual physical violence yet, and that was pursuant to my guidelines that I gave them out there. We didn't want to go too far with somebody getting punched. And so what did you think about, and the supervisor, I coached him as well, and now I want to think through what you all saw and what you all thought and what you should have been done differently or what was done well. Let's talk about first about what the supervisor did well, okay? Not supervisor in the situation. What did you see him do that you liked?
He broke it so quickly.
He broke it up quickly. He intercepted. That was really quick, okay? He's got the eagle eye for this one. He knew that when he saw those three people, there was trouble. No. All right, so what else did you see?
I saw he took command. He took command and tried to immediately separate.
Took command, sure did. And in this situation, he was able to do it without touching anybody, which is pretty exceptional. Instead of physically separate. It's better that you don't physically touch another employee there. So that was another well done thing there. What else?
Would you really even want a supervisor to physically separate people?
Pardon me?
Should a supervisor really physically separate?
Normally you should not. You'd be trying to protect yourself. If he had gotten in between those two people, he might have had to have protected himself in that situation. It's just a very uncomfortable situation. But he was able to do it verbally without any additional help, physical or otherwise. All
I
right?
can picture the supervisor getting sued later when he hurt one of the other people pushing them away.
And we do see suits like that later. And all the good intentions are turned against you. But at this point, he's doing great. What is one thing he could have done better?
Reported immediately.
He could have reported immediately. What about how he treated the three? Yes, sir.
You only singled out the individual that he didn't know what happened prior to that to know who instigated it. Would you only push away from one person, or would you have additional discussion with the other two that were involved, to maybe send them home too?
Right.
To not look like you singled out one person or the other.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, and that's.
Yeah, he picked on the big guy, didn't he? But the best practice here, that was not the best practice of what he did, and that was built in as part of the scenario. What you want to do there is separate them and then divide them, but treat them equally. Here we have three people who are disrupting work, and you don't know yet the context of what was going on. It would be better to send all three out of that situation. Keep them, send them somebody this place, somebody to HR, somebody to safety. As to how that would happen, literally, you would have to think through where you'd be sending them. You don't want to send them in a pack to the HR office, because then it's going to blow up again, right? So you would want to separate to the extent you could, and then, but you don't want to just say, just you go, unless you've seen, you, the supervisor, actually seen somebody, totally a one-sided affair, and even then, I don't know that you know all the scenario. It's a lot easier to send out of the facility and work things out later than keep people there, because it's just going to blow up again, okay? That's the potential. So I would think that's one takeaway from this scenario is we want to separate equally and get them off site. And then the flow chart would begin at that point, right? Supervisor reports, the response team considers, and then evaluates, the risk exposed by that and whether or not the policies have been violated. Questions, comments about that? Now, one part of the scenario was, okay, we sent the one guy home, and he hadn't gone home. He's sitting in the parking lot. He's gotten that report. Did the supervisor do the right thing after he got the report that the guy's just sitting in the parking lot? Yeah, I mean, you need to report that. And if necessary, we're going to be calling 911, because if you've sent somebody home, they change from being an authorized person on site So a person is not authorized to be here, and they have now, if they refuse to leave, they're a trespasser. Okay?
Wouldn't the best practice be, if it's possible, to get somebody to escort that person all the way out, and not tell our code, but
Yeah.
when they're emotional, to walk out on their own,
That would be a great way to do that.
if it's possible.
If you had enough people that, and that's the difficulty here of what do you do, if it's just the one of you, how do you deal with that? But here it could be escorting one and coming back, or best yet would be getting more people, more help to help with that. Yes, sir.
Would you want to allow anybody to leave? I mean, physically leave the property, leave the campus, leave work.
Why wouldn't you want to?
If you go tell him go to his car, go to his parking lot, he's going to go out to his car and come back in.
You could go out and come back in with a weapon, is what you're saying? Yeah.
Or you don't lose the ability to question him or de-escalate the situation if you force him to leave without necessarily getting the other side of the story.
Yeah, and so it's a balance there, but I think on balance, we do want to separate and then have them leave. And we're doing a couple things. One is we're giving them the opportunity to cool down. Yes, we do. There is the risk that they don't cool down. They sit in the truck and it goes from a simmer to a boil. But we want to get them off site and out of our danger zone. But the other thing is we can't keep somebody here that doesn't want to be here. You know, and that would be false imprisonment too. So,
I already agree we shouldn't have done that to begin with. We should have separated them and not sent anybody home.
well, I think we want to separate them, and if sending them home is a good option often, okay, it really depends on the situation. The one that we were seeing here hadn't gone to such an extent. If they had physically exchanged blows and it's just a knockdown drag out, I think we're getting everybody off and we're calling the police if we need to. He interceded in time that the tempers didn't flare so much that I think there was an option of separating and talking to each person in a conference room as they're cooling down there. It really depends on the supervisor and the situation they're seeing. The rule of thumb here is doing the best you can under your policy, confronted with that. Grant cited another kind of best practice of having others involved here too. But this is just a real simple scenario, but you can see how the different wrinkles to it. And in the end, just think of protecting your own safety and the safety of others. But having said that, we don't want you as supervisors, throwing yourself on somebody with a gun or somebody in the middle of a fight either. So it's a balance, right? Questions, comments about any of that? Do we have time for one more? Or?
Real quick.
Okay. All right. Real quick scenario. I need. Let's see, 2 volunteers, right, for scenario 1?
1 or 2.
Let's get 2.
Scenario 2.
Oh, I'm sorry, scenario 1.
Scenario 1 is Kirk Dallas, Greg Pickerel, Doug Hoffman.
Come on down. All right, this is scenario 1. It's a short scenario, but it's one that may happen occasionally here. And with that, our participants are supervisor and HR, and now our other vital member. This is not the love triangle, remember. The other vital member is coming from stage right. So with that. Cue. Yeah.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm fine. What's up?
Good. I'm Kurt. I don't think we've met before.
I don't think we have.
You work back in this area?
No.
Okay. Who are you? You with somebody?
I just waiting on a buddy of mine.
Waiting on who?
A buddy of mine.
Yeah. Who's that?
John.
John. Okay. We usually what we do is we go through the front and we get a badge. I just can't see your badge. Maybe send me your jacket.
Yeah, I don't work here. I'm just waiting on John. He told me to meet him over here.
All right. Well, can you hang out here with me just for a second here? Sure.
Calling HR.
It sure is. Doug? Hey. I guess somebody's back here in the back. I know they're stealing water.
You got anybody else with you?
No, I'm back here by myself. I just,
Anybody close by that you have come with you?
yeah, it's a pretty good sized guy here towards the table. Grab him.
You made some of those, they look dangerous.
Yeah, he's actually sliding out the back door. We'll keep an eye on him if you can get
I
somebody
think
else
I'll
back
call
here.
Duncan Police and see if they can ride on the table.
Okay. Oh, can't get out the door.
Let's have a round of applause. Man, that was great. You guys did exceptional. So we had, the title of scenario 1 is Suspicious Stranger. And did we have a suspicious stranger that time? Oh, yeah. Yeah. So what was, just as we quickly, I know your time is valuable here, but let's quickly debrief. What was one of the first indicators to the supervisor that caused suspicion about our suspicious stranger? What were some of the things?
No badge.
No badge. So at AFL, you all have badges. Or if you're a visitor, you get a sticker. He didn't see either of them, and that was intentional here. Okay, so that was one thing. What's another thing, another warning sign you saw?
No eye contact.
No eye contact, right? The actual scenario had us wearing sunglasses, but it's been so dark lately we didn't even do that. It was just, he intentionally failed to make eye contact for purposes of our scenario, but that's an indicator. If somebody's not making eye contact, sometimes they're up to something, right? What's another thing? How about their verbal interaction? No details. How about the supervisor? The supervisor was asking some good questions, right? You know, who are you? What are you doing here? May I help you? Okay? Those were all good things. And what he was getting in response was, I'm not employed here, I'm here to meet with John, and he's still getting really vague responses. So what did the supervisor do that was a good thing?
Call Sharice.
Yeah, you called HR or the appropriate person. You want to call somebody else. And how about, what was HR's response in this scenario?
Call the police.
Call the police. All right? At this point, it's gotten kind of, not only a suspicious stranger left this area, he's gone outside, no telling what's going on there. So you really do, at that point, want to get some help. Okay? And it was also a good idea to have, you know, two people involved, getting the lawyer involved, because big guy, you know, helping always helps. But that was well done, and that was a depiction of, you remember the slide that says DANGER, we had an interaction. The reason why the supervisor initially approached was that there was no obvious threat to him, right? There wasn't any gun, wasn't any knife being exposed, but rather it was an interaction of making sure that it was somebody that should be there. And once it was determined that they shouldn't be there, then they were taking steps to get that person out of that area. Questions, comments about that scenario? Yes, sir.
Well, since we found out he wasn't an employee, could we not just ask him to leave politely, to come back to the visitors center or the visitor entrance?
That's where this was headed, okay? But it's going to be a judgment call by that supervisor. We had enough danger signs right then that, you know, and then he leaves, then we're going to be calling somebody. I think that's appropriate there. Now, yesterday, we did that same scenario, and it was a really neat interaction, some really good comments, because the way the scenario led was the supervisor was going to take the visitor through the plant to the HR office. Okay, and there was some discussion about whether we would really physically want to escort somebody you don't know about through the plant to a place like that, and no telling what would happen. And so I think the general rule of thumb we came out with there is that it would be best not to parade that person through the plant, but rather to go through a perimeter if possible in another kind of scenario there. Questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Would we really want to do that? I mean, if you saw someone hanging around the back of the cable plant and I start walking them around the building, that's a long way and there's no one back there.
So we were talking about having two people. Maybe it's, you know, from the door you're watching to see where this person's going, okay? Maybe not physically escorting, but then it gets to the logistics of how you're going to get that person there and what you're going to do. the option, there are lots of options. I'm not sure there's the one best option about what to do in that scenario, about how to get that person from a place where he shouldn't be to a place where he should be. Maybe it is getting police over there right then and waiting for that. Or maybe if it's like me, yesterday, I got here, good receptionist, etc. I said, where's the restroom, right? She cleared me to go to the restroom area. If I had made a wrong turn, I would have been in a work area instead. I would have been a stranger, maybe a suspicious stranger, and what they would have done is just said, you need to be that way. Maybe just be pointing me into the work area and just watching to observe that I go through that door and get to a more secured area. So each situation is going to be a little different, but for purposes of our training, you are now more attuned to the issue. Workplace violence is real. It happens all over. It's happened at AFL. You all have a good policy that's in place. You have a good system in place. You have good procedures in place. And now you have the training to integrate you into those things. I appreciate this opportunity, Grant, to be here, and we'll close out.
Thanks for being here, Will.